So welcome everyone. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Katie Randall from Arup, and I am the workstream lead for the Operational Engine Room as part of the Delivery Partner Programme. I sit within the Project Support and Assurance workstream, working day to day with the SPOCs that you no doubt have quite a lot of contact with. And on the call today, we have other members of the Delivery Partner, Arup, PwC, and Turner & Townsend, and the Delivery Agent, Salix. This is the last of our currently planned series of SHDF grant recipient group engagement sessions, and these sessions have been designed to provide you with the information required to support you to deliver your SHDF Wave 2.1 project. Today we'll be covering performance management project remediation, and the session should provide you with a high-level overview of the remediation processes should they become necessary for your project. The format of today will be a 30-minute presentation, followed by a question panel related to today's content. The panel will last for up to 30 minutes. The session will be recorded, and we will make it available after this session along with the slides. You should be able to access all of the historical sessions and the slide content, and we'll recirculate the link to these after the call. If you do have any questions, please add them into the chat during the presentation, and we will direct them to the Q&A panel at the end. As a reminder, if you have any project-specific questions, we do ask that you direct them towards your SPOC. Please be aware that through the course of the presentation, your cameras and mics have been disabled, and they will be re-enabled again once the question panel begins. Just to reiterate, we are intending to record the session, and the recording and slides will be made available after the event in a follow-up email. I will now hand over to Russell for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Katie. Good afternoon, everybody. Joe, can you just roll on to the first slide, please? So what we're going to look at is performance expectations. Just a bit of a recap. The first few slides are going to look at the monthly customer journey and how that process leads us to a position every month where, following the confidence assessment, we can consider the early warnings that are coming through that process. Next slide, please. So we're going to look through performance expectations. What are the triggers for remediation? The recommendations process that we as a delivery partner need to follow, the contents of a remediation plan, and then how that leads into ongoing progress monitoring. And then we'll finish off with the question panel. Next slide, please. So this is just a reminder of the customer journey that you're currently on every month to go through the monitoring process for your projects. So it should go without saying that our focus during these meetings, and the key point of reviewing what the work content is that we're looking to avoid remediation at all costs where we can. But you'll see from this process flow that we are led to a point where we can consider a change request. And if that change request process runs currently, it's in use and it's being dealt with separately under different guidance, we'll drop the link into the change control guidance that you've currently had delivered, and it's there for you to review. And that'll be shared with the relevant links at the end as well. So through that monthly assessment, if it does come to the point that a project change request is the next step and the project delivery will also carry on in the short term while that project change request is being reviewed, raised and assessed. Next slide, please. So it is key that in order to complete the monthly review process and move your project forward, it is dependent upon the ability to collect high quality data and also communicate that in line with the timescales that we've got agreed. The delivery partner teams are constantly pulling data at program level and at project level, and we're looking for trends that may require action, which may lead to some form of remediation. But it's not all data driven. So there is a reliance on having a clear understanding, which is based on the interaction that we have with you and your ability to be self-aware of any risks to your project and delivery. So rather than just working on them in isolation, you keep your SPOC appraised of how work is going, so that in the event that you do need some assistance, we're better placed to understand what that need is and the pace that we need to react to support you. Next slide, please, Joe. So that's a recap on what the monthly reporting encompasses. So it's the various pieces of data that will make up your monthly report that you submit, and the delivery partner teams will form an opinion based on each project on that level of information submitted. So its accuracy and the ability to identify where risks arise is dependent on what is submitted. So if there are gaps, it puts us at a disadvantage. So that the management of your data is always a good indicator of your project health, particularly where you might be struggling with that aspect, which could be for a number of reasons. So the ability to implement good data practices or not can be an early warning of remediation. But like it or not, these projects rely on good data flow to be effective. Next slide, please. So what we're here to talk about today is remediation. So what is remediation? Is it a status? Is it a pathway to improvement? Or is it a cry for help? Potentially it could be all three of those. But the two key factors that we focus on are underperforming, which is one which could suggest that a project is behind in its projections. So that's either in year or overall across the delivery, or there's just a risk to the delivery where the risk is so significant that there's potential that project could fail in its entirety. So the remediation process could be seen to be a reactive one typically, but we are aiming through this process to be as proactive as we can, so that rather than just watch the events unfold on a project, we're able to track them and determine with you what might be needed to bring that project back online and correct any underperformance. So that may be a short-term fix that's needed, or in the event of more serious issues or longer term delays, we can work with you to get the right corrective action for your project. Next slide, please. So what's the impact on reporting generally? The key message from this is that regardless of what happens, regardless of what discussions on remediation are going on, your normal monthly reporting and assessment process will continue. That has to happen. We have to keep those meetings in the diary. We have to keep that level of assessment going. But if a project enters remediation, then it's very likely there will be a number of interim meetings which are set up to discuss the specific aspects of where remediation may be required. And we'll talk through these with the key contacts from your project team or those in the organisation who may have the more specialist knowledge or understanding. And we'll pair these up with the relevant subject matter experts from the delivery partner to get to the right outputs. So most of these meetings are likely to include your SPOC. That's what we'd like to keep the SPOC in the loop at all times, but some may be just between a subject matter expert. It all depends on the circumstances. And a key thing to mention there is where a consortia is impacted, and it may not be the lead member's organisation who's requiring the support. There is still a requirement that the lead member has that responsibility to bring the right people to the meetings and draw in the appropriate resources from within the consortia to develop a remediation plan and then effectively implement it. Next slide, please, Joe. We've got the remediation triggers. We're just going to do a quick recap on what this is. So as part of your monthly assessment, those are the three inputs that go into our assessment. So your monthly data, so the discussions online, and then anything else that comes about in between meetings. So the triggers that are discussed monthly with you, and they're summarised in your outcome report, the summary email you receive, and which gives you your DCA conference score. So that sets the stall for a pathway that may lead to remediation. So it shouldn't come as any surprise that your project performance may be moving in a direction that suggests remediation could be considered. But this links back to what we said earlier in the slides on customer journey. We need all of those three buckets of information to be available in order to monitor your project and determine the course of effective action, which could be remediation if it's required. But all of these processes are time bound, and we work together to get that data we need into the systems each month, allow that accurate reporting, and allow the flow of other information from that. Next slide, please. So the trigger process generally works on a steady progression through the RAG rating, through the 5 RAG rating tiers that we have. So it goes from green, amber, up all the way through to red. And on that stasis remaining at a particular position over a couple of months. So the standard approach is that if your project remains in red for 2 consecutive months or amber for 3 consecutive months, then the management strategy is triggered and we start to look at what the options are to bring it back online, and that could be remediation. Now, there are concerns that where there is evidence that other criteria are impacting on the project RAG score, such as a change request is in play, then if that's currently waiting resolution, that will be weighed up against any intent to promote the project for remediation, and we may decide collectively to defer that remediation until that corrective action is carried out. Next slide, please. So these are the areas that we generally look at are the triggers for remediation. So we've covered these in previous slides. We've talked about what the monthly assessment looks at. And a lot of assessment is put into whether the project is effectively set up for success. And all of these are core elements of the project. And are they there? Are they operating effectively? And obviously this stems from good project management, which we've always talked about. And you having a clear delivery plan that's both reasonable and achievable. Now, getting contracts and agreements in place, we understand, is always a challenge, and we look at how those relationships are forming between you and your contractors and your supply chain, if they're not already established, because we need to get an understanding as to the cohesion across your project. And this is essential in meeting those KPI targets and avoiding the need to continually look at reprofiling your project. So the relationships between the parties are often the key to success to recovering an underperforming project. So what do we do with that information? Next slide, please. So the remediation process, we need to make a recommendation that the project is going to move from general delivery status into remediation. Next slide, please. So the monitoring process that with the SPOC will take all of those pieces of that puzzle, and they'll build up an assessment of the project. So month on month, we'll be identifying any areas that may need further probing or areas that potentially need additional support, and we'll initiate that course correction. And we'll need to evidence that we've used all the tools at our collective disposal to try and bring this back online. So during those conversations with yourself, we'll identify where the project is self-aware, so what you know about your project performance, and where we're able to implement change currently, or potentially we need to bring in external resources so that everyone is on the same page and that remediation is known to be the next step in getting the performance back to where it needs to be. So at this point, we would make a recommendation to the delivery agent, Salix, that we would propose to initiate a package of works. So during that month-on-month assessment, we'll make sure that we're constantly recording what what most appropriate action is. So those triggers then set out a defined series of actions, and we'll mobilize a team and formally create a remediation plan for presentation to the delivery agent. Now, there is a 5-day target built into the contract for this. And we'll deploy resources to assist you. That'll include your SPOC in achieving that plan. So we can present one that's both practical and achievable. But there is obviously, you see there, it's got to be done in 5 working days. And the question is, what if you're not able to complete that within 5 days? We would hope that we'd be well prepared before we trigger the remediation plan, with the understanding that what needs to be achieved. But if we can't achieve that in the 5 days, we'd have to follow an escalation process, and that would go through the delivery agent Salix, and they would look to contact you more formally and clarify what the issues are, what the barriers are to complete that. Next slide, please. So the development of the plan is a grant recipient responsibility, first and foremost. But the delivery partner team, we can help you to develop this. We can't write it for you, okay? But we are there to assist you during the process, and we'll guide you in using the information that you have to hand so that we have a shared understanding as to where those weaknesses are and what needs to be addressed. And also we'll help you to drill into where targeted specialist activity may be needed. But our role is to make sure the plan addresses all of the areas identified from within the risk assessment. So the risk pillars we talked about earlier. So they've been appropriately captured. The detail is there behind what the activity is doing, and it's sufficiently developed, and it tells a clear story of what actions need to take place and what the outputs of those actions are, and then how they will be delivered by the various project stakeholders. Next slide, please. So the remediation plan itself, and we'll talk through how we pull that together with you. So next slide, please. So the first step is to identify what resources are available to be deployed. So are there existing project team members who are able to do a focused piece of work to bring about that change, or are they already swamped with day-to-day activity and you need some assistance? We need to know, do you have the capability and capacity to bring in other resources alongside you? Can your contracting team support you in these activities? And we'll work with you to determine whether as a group we feel all of those necessary remediation actions can be achieved by the project team or within the organisation or within your collective consortia. Or ultimately, whether there's a need to reach beyond that for beyond the existing resource to external resource. And where external support is necessary, we'll work at what that can look like so that it communicates in the plan why the activity can't be enacted from within the project team, using the existing project funding that's already been allocated to you. So again, we talked about previously, there's a short time scale to complete this, but by the time we reach this stage, we should have a good understanding of what's needed beforehand. But as a DP, we have a responsibility to provide regular updates to the delivery agent on how those discussions are going and how remediation plans are building up. Next slide, please. And obviously, each project is different, and some may have a clearer approach to tackling what this task looks like in the 5-day period, but others may also be looking for more guidance to keep themselves on track. But regardless, we will establish a number of touch points with you, and these will be agreed between you and the SPOC. They could be daily check-ins, morning or end of day stand-ups to track the progress, or it could be a number of focused sessions to work through the tasks and helping you build that plan progressively. But it will definitely involve set periods to review the plan and undertake a quality assessment before we can promote that plan as one that is clearly defined, evidence-based and achievable. Okay, so the touch points will be with you, your SPOC, and a member of the remediation team who has that specialist knowledge. Next slide, please. So currently the delivery partner provides a range of support through the monthly engagement, but we also have a broader range of skills and knowledge in this area. And this is built up from the involvement that we have with a number of funding projects over the years. Our work directly supporting housing providers in delivery activity, sometimes acting as client or client's agent on their behalf. But this allows us to be proactive and identify where the projects may become derailed and use a range of tools that we've got to drill into that project makeup and establish where the targeted support will be most effective. So proactively, we look to use the existing monitoring process and SPOC network to do this. But where necessary, we'll draw on that specialist resource from within the wider businesses of T&T, Arup, and PwC, who make up the delivery partner group. And if it is appropriate, we can also reach out and deploy some of the external subcontractors resources that we have for more specialist activity. But this isn't a shopping list of activity. These are just the examples of the range of skills that should already be working across your project, across the grant recipients. Either you, your delivery agent, your contractor, or within the consortium. And we can mirror those skills to help you get to the bottom of the bottlenecks or identify those pinch points that may be holding back your project. But our aim is to undertake the focused work that will help to give you the pathway to improvement. Next slide, please. So we've gone over plan creation earlier, the roles and responsibilities already, but just to summarise what the key aspects of the plan need to be, the plan needs to demonstrate what skills and knowledge are needed to remediate the activity. It must clearly specify what grant recipient resource and other resource from your disposal will be deployed. It must also have the defined milestones that will evidence what the course correction is to get your project back on track. And if there is a need to bring in external supplemental resource, it'll need to demonstrate value for money. But obviously, where there is an ongoing issue that can't be resolved at an operational level, to meet the 5-day turnaround in developing that plan, we'll engage with Salix to determine the most appropriate way forward. Next slide, please. So just a quick page on obviously fairly obvious tips. This one speaks for itself. So just as when you've developed your initial delivery plan, the remediation plan needs to be well structured, clear definitions, it shows what's going to be achieved and states what those outputs are. But we can't promote a remediation plan that has gaps in its information. It must be evidence-based, and if we feel it's not realistic in its expectations, well, we can't back that. Most critically, the timescales that are proposed need to be quick enough to deliver the outcomes that are needed, reflective of the financial year constraints on spending, and as well as the reality of delivering in the time frame initiated and the factors such as time of year, weather, etc., etc. So just like the change request process, the information that you provide needs to stand up to scrutiny in order for us to take it forward for a decision. Next slide. So this is the last slide, so you'll be pleased to hear that. So next slide, please, Joe. So once remediation is triggered, there needs to be an increased level of monitoring. That should go without saying. So by this point, you're likely to already be engaged in fortnightly meetings with your SPOC, and you've probably undertaken a number of additional discussions about project performance. But a key factor in project monitoring is the ability to identify, track, and manage risks and issues. So we make sure that they're given the right amount of priority. So as part of remediation, those interim meetings become more formal with issued minutes, actions generated. So collectively, we know the process is delivering to its expectations. So what we are trying to avoid is the failure of any project that may result in the withdrawal of funds from the scheme. But fundamentally, we're all motivated to do this work so we can improve the lives of the people who need these improvements most. Again, good project management gives us the confidence of what we're delivering, that it's been done in time to the right quality, and we can increase that confidence through our record keeping. So thank you all for your time. So we'll move into the Q&A portion of today's session.
Thanks, Russell, for that very interesting presentation. I am going to ask that if you do have questions, to please post them in the chat now. This helps us to record the questions as part of our frequently asked questions process, and ensure that we have a record of these coming through. I will kick us off with one question for the panel, which is just to ask, I'm sure all of the grant recipients are interested, what is the cost to the grant recipient for the remediation support that you'll be providing?
So I can take that one. So there is no cost directly to the grant recipient. Obviously, we need to make sure that we're identifying resources for this, which are within the organisation's current availability to deploy. But any external resource, we would present that as a costed piece of work to Salix, and they would make the decision as to whether that progresses. But there's no direct cost for the remediation service.
Thanks, Russell. I can see a query from Kevin Yates. Kevin, did you want to come in?
Can you hear me? Hi there. Yes, just a quick question. I mean, that was a great presentation, but you went through an awful lot quite quickly, and it covered a great deal of ground. But one of the things that I sort of picked up, which were little bits of things that were commented on, is that you talked about the remedial plans and there being a value for money element into whatever remedial plan was going to be implemented. So when you're looking at that value for money, are you talking about the value for money for the grant recipient in additional co-funding, or are you talking about extra funding? extra government funding to help recover the plan.
Russell, did you want to come in?
Yeah. So the value for money aspect of it, it's a little bit twofold. So if the project needs to be supported, we need to make sure that the project is capable of delivering, so that we can, even if that resource is delivered within the grant recipient's own sort of deployment. But generally, as a value for money aspect from the department, it's looking at your overall project, where you are, what you still have left to achieve, and the level of input that's needed to go into that project to recover that project. So we just need to present the fact that what we are adding to the project on top of the existing grant funding already allocated still stacks up.
So you talk about additional financial inputs, potentially.
Potentially, if there are additional financial inputs that the department would need to fund, there definitely will be increased focus on that, yes.
If it's worth it. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much.
Russell, to clarify, when we're talking about that, we're specifically thinking about, for example, the cost of resources to support that, not necessarily additional specific grant funding. Okay, Cara has a question about templates. Cara, did you want to come in?
Oh, hello. Can you hear me? Great, thank you. Yeah, should anyone find themselves in the situation where a remediation plan is needed, and we've obviously got the 5-day turnaround to develop that, is there guidance or templates, word counts that will be issued in that situation?
Hello, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I can come in on that one. Thanks, Cara. There won't be a template of sorts, but there will be because each project's remediation could look quite different. But your SPOC will work with you on a standard format that sets out the reasons that the project needs remediation. And as we mentioned in the presentation, how we're going to bring the project back on track through those smart actions so that they're measurable, deliverable, and we can monitor that remediation is working.
Okay, thank you.
And I can see Rashida has asked if we are planning to distribute the PowerPoint presentation. Yes, we will be distributing that along with this recording after the session, so you have access to both, as well as the backlog of previous sessions on the other topics that we've been running. I don't see any more questions in chat. You were clearly very comprehensive, Russell. I will pause for another another minute or so in case any come through. Okay. Here we go. Katia, did you want to come in to your query about the remediation plan?
Hi, it's a very slow system my end, I'm afraid. I just wanted to, I think I may have missed it. At what point do we need to go into a remedial plan? As in, I know there was mention, obviously, if you're in amber for 3 months, obviously then this is a trigger, and then it's red for 2 months. Is that pretty much a set in stone sort of point in which you would have to then look to go down that road? Sorry, Russell, I can't hear you if you're talking.
So those triggers are defined by the department that we need to monitor against. But as I said it during the presentation, there may be mitigating circumstances. So there may be other factors at play. So what we are seeing at the moment is change requests are part of that process, and the need to move projects through a change control process first to correct where you sit in that RAG rating. So sometimes there is a carryover, so you may stay at a particular status longer than would normally be intended. But then we know that what you're planning to do will bring your project back into a more acceptable position.
Okay.
Okay, so each
so
project is
it isn't
individual.
instant trigger. It's more after the PCR, if things aren't then looking to go to green or into the status that then it would. Okay, it's just to try and understand it better from my point of view. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's a constant monitoring process we do, and obviously remediation is there just ready to be deployed, but we have to be sure that we're deploying it at the right time. So it's not a knee-jerk reaction. It has to be based on how your project is performing.
That's fine. I think I was just trying to understand, that there is still opportunity to sort of bring things back without getting to that stage where you need to put in a quick 5-day plan of how do we bring it back? So that's great. Thank you.
Yes, it's not a stick. It's there as a tool.
No, I didn't see it quite like that, but it was more just like, is it a tool that's slightly excessive if there's other ways that we can, bring things back?
So we
in a
would
more
want
gradual and
to work with you during those monthly meetings to identify what actions you can take yourself rather than moving it into remediation. Yes.
Great, thank you very much.
Hannah, did you want to come in and ask your question?
Yeah, this should just be a relatively quick one. So I was just going to ask if there was a place where we documented like our decision to not do a remediation plan. So if it was pending a change request or whatever, even though it was in red for 2 months, where do we document that? Just because I'm conscious I don't want to be chased for a remediation plan if there's a good reason behind my decision not to put one together.
Russell, did you want to come in on that?
I'm going to let Carlo take that one because it's a process one.
Thanks for that one, Russell. Yeah, thanks, Hannah. That will be recorded on the back office systems within the delivery partner. So we'll get that information out to you post this session.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I can't see any other questions in the chat at this stage. So if you do have any feedback on the content of the session, then please get in touch with us via JTs, who you received the invitation for this event from. The team are now going to share a quick poll question in the chat. If you could take a moment before leaving that to complete it, if possible. Your feedback's really important to us. We use this as a way to sense check if there's anything else that we need to provide information or guidance on and anything we need to tweak. But otherwise, I think we can draw this to a close. If you do have any further questions on your project specifically, please do get in contact with your SPOC and we'd be more than happy to help you. Thanks, everyone.